directly being affected by the operations of Range Resources and the Carter Impoundment. Most of you here today believe that I am an anti-driller and that I am responsible for the residents of this township who have been unable to have wells drilled on their properties due to this issue with the township. I want to personally set the record straight and let you know that I am not here to dispute gas drilling or royalties to any family wishing to use their land for gas drilling. I'm here today to state my case and show evidence that these wastewater impoundments are not only a nuisance, but a major health issue to residents living in their proximity. I'm here to promote the awareness to Mount Pleasant residents, the township supervisors, of the health risk associated with these impoundments, and to have them properly placed in designated zoned areas, not in residential or agricultural zones. My husband and I purchased our farm in 2009. About 2 months later, construction began on a Carter freshwater pond. But shortly after construction was completed, the pond freshwater was converted to a wastewater flowback. And I do have a photo. This is what it looks like. And that is my house that sits 815 feet from that wastewater impoundment.
You want to show the board?
You say there is a house or not?
That is my house in the back, right here. Again, my farm sits 800 feet from this site. Let me say that that is not a cover protecting the impoundment. It contains the actual dirty frack water from drilling. Please remember, I had no say, nor was I ever advised that the site was going to be converted to a wastewater impoundment. But yet I have suffered the direct negative effects of having this toxic waste dump put in my backyard. In late 2012, I began to realize that living this close to a wastewater impoundment was not only a constant noise issue, but a major health issue too. My husband and I began to experience some strange environmental issues with the farm, along with beginning to experience major air issues coming from the direction of the Carter impoundment. I contacted numerous environmental groups and even the DEP to help me with my concerns about the possible contamination of the wastewater site. I immediately was told the bad side effects of living so close to wastewater impoundments and that my family should be tested for possible toxins in our blood and urine system. I was shocked and in disbelief that this could actually be happening in my backyard. I was very skeptical with these testing and decided not to believe what I was being told. But my area issues continued to get worse, and my health and my husband's health were showing signs of possible exposure to VOCs from the impoundment. In February of 2013, my husband and I decided to get our urine and blood tested because our air issues were increasingly getting worse and our worst fear came to light. Both my husband's and my tests showed chronic exposure to harmful toxins. I now feared for the health of my 7.5-year-old daughter, who may also be being directly impacted by this impoundment. With much hesitation, we tested my daughter. And sadly enough, she too is testing positive for the same toxins in her system. We immediately spoke with specialists, doctors, and even toxicologists to try and find out what to do and what does this all mean. Imagine being told that the gas drilling and wastewater pits are so new to this area that there is just not enough evidence or testing to show that daily exposure to this, what it will do to your body. Additionally, we were told by many doctors to vacate our property and that long-term exposure to these toxins can cause cancer or even neurological side effects. Many doctors' immediate concerns for the health of my daughter and the lasting developmental and hormonal issues that might be associated with her test results. I could not believe I was living this nightmare, but I had to try and get credible evidence that my air was being contaminated. I was able to have numerous environmental groups come out and do air testing at my farm, and I do have one such test with me here today to show the poor quality of my air and how this is affecting me and my family on a daily basis. Please let me quote what this particular group stated. The data gathered on particulate matter in the air strongly suggests that the activity at the pit is polluting the family's air. The extreme high levels alone are alarming and cause for health concerns. Children are particularly susceptible to high levels, which can cause respiratory and other health problems because their bodies and lungs are not fully developed. There is an additional plausible risk to their health from toxic chemicals coming from this impoundment. This environmental group also strongly suggests we leave our farm. Vacate my farm. It might sound easy, but it's not. Where are we to go? This is our life here. This is our home, and I have to vacate because of a wastewater pit in my backyard. My story doesn't end here, since there are so many other issues we are having with this wastewater pit in my backyard. Imagine waking up every day wondering if you will have a strong chemical smell hit you when you walk out your back door. Imagine hoping the wind blows the other directions, just so that you can at least have 5 minutes or hours free from nasty smells and a day to enjoy your farm. Imagine fearing every time your child complains of a headache, aches or pains, or suddenly unexplained bruising. My story is not an isolated case. There are other residents living by the Carter impoundment with my same story. 3 minutes just isn't enough to fully educate everyone about the negative sides of wastewater impoundments. I hope the township supervisors will think long and hard about allowing wastewater pounds in residential or agricultural zones. If we continue to allow this activity to go on in Mount Pleasant Township, my story just might end up being yours.
We understand your comments, Mrs. Stubbs. You understand how this meeting is with respect to possible resolution of specific matters that are in front of the zoning hearing board right now, one of which is under this proposal to close and decommission the Carter impoundment and reclaim it.
My name is Ray Beiersdorfer. I've been a professor at YSU for 21 years. I have 13 years of college where I earned 3 degrees in geology. I also worked for Gulf Oil as an exploration geologist in California, covering Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and offshore California. I did that for 3 years, and I spent a year as an ESSO pre-doctoral research scholar in Australia, working on the Gippsland Basin. For those of you that are out of town, I'd like to welcome you all to Youngstown, the induced seismicity capital of Ohio, and I'll explain more about that in just a bit. I also want to mention that opening next week is a film project, the Marcellus Shale documentary project. It's a photo exhibition. It's going to be here for about a month, but that's going to be opening next week. And the events with that are, there's going to be the last week in March. I'm going to give a live lecture, and I sort of borrowed the title a little bit from Tony Ingraffi. I'm calling it The Science of Shale Gas, Geology, Seismology, and Environmental Impacts. And I sort of got the idea from his talk, which is going to be a Skype lecture. It's going to be similar to the one that he did in Butler, PA, I think, that a few of you saw on November 21st. Of last year, and it's called The Science of Shale Gas, the Latest Evidence on Leaky Wells, Methane Emissions, and Implications for Policy. And they're both going to be in Mosier Hall, which is the engineering building off of Lincoln Avenue in the big auditorium on the 2nd floor. So that'll be Tuesday and Wednesday, the 25th and 26th. And then the director of the Marcellus Shale documentary project, Brian Cohen, is going to be here, and there's going to be a reception, and he's going to give either a gallery talk or a more formal talk. Now, what I want to do is I just want to give you an update over the past year, some of the things that have come out. In June of last year, the nurses came out, and the American Nursing Association, the American Public Health Association, and the resident section of the American Medical Association came out and publicly called for a moratorium on fracking. Also, last October, an article came out showing about they looked at the water. This is Duke University lab. They looked at the water quality from a shale gas wastewater surface disposal facility. So they were doing some treating and then releasing the water into a creek. And the most scary part about this is that they found high concentrations of radium, 200 times higher than what was upstream. And radium is radioactive. You know, shales are a source of uranium, and then they wind up, it undergoes, eventually goes under radioactive decay and becomes lead. But on the way, it goes into other products. It forms radon, which also, if you breathe, is a problem. It can cause lung cancer. And then radium is a danger because it behaves like calcium. And, our bones are made out of calcium, so it can get into people's bones. And so they found 200 times greater concentrations, way above the safe limits in here. And one of the things that they haven't even thought about is this Utica shale is 450 million years old. It's the oldest shale that they're fracking anywhere in the country. And they're not even paying any attention to this. Nobody's even thinking about the fact that the older the rock is, the more of these radioactive byproducts they're going to have. And so radium is something that's not even being looked at. And this is the same waters that that they were bringing over here to Patriot Water as well as to the disposal well. So it makes logical sense. Is that okay for the lawyers, Susie? Okay, to assume that we had low-level radioactive waste injected underneath Youngstown, and they're probably doing it at Patriot as well. At Patriot, they just have the dirt settle out. The mud settles out, and then they release it. So Susie's saying, be careful, they're going to sue you. All right, so this is the second paper from the Colorado School of Public Health. And what's scary about this one is they looked at almost 124,842 births in rural Colorado. They ignored Denver and the other cities, and they looked at that, and they looked at birth defects, and they correlated them with proximity to shale gas wells. And the scary one is that the mothers that were in closest proximity to shale gas wells had a 30% greater chance of having congenital heart defects in their babies than a woman who lived over 10 miles away from the closest well. So they, so they know that there's a connection now with birth defects and this fracking, this shale gas in Colorado. This follows up an earlier paper, which was in that first video we saw. They scanned this one. It's the same research group, Colorado School of Public Health. And this one, what they found out is that they were looking at during the frack job, like that 7 days when they're fracking, that people that were in a half a mile of a well, even if nothing goes wrong, got exposed to hazardous levels of neurotoxins and carcinogens. And it seems like that first video, and that's part of the reason, it seems it's through the air. Because they also, in these papers, they ruled out that it wasn't the water they were drinking. There's also some preliminary studies by social scientists, not by scientists, in Pennsylvania, connecting proximity to shale gas wells with birth weights, low birth weights in babies. And that hasn't been peer-reviewed yet, but it's been reported. PhD student at Cornell, and then some economics faculty. We saw this video. This just came out a couple of weeks ago, this fracking in the Eagle Ford Shale. It's interesting that seeing the Weather Channel, which we think sort of a mainstream sort of cable station, was involved in this presentation, and it's getting a lot of interest. Of course, I don't think the Vindicator had anything about it, though. All right. Now, I wound up participating in a couple of debates. Once I got on the what's the guy's name? The radio guy in the morning? Dan Rivers show. And I said, go ahead, have all your audience, bring it on. Have them rip me a new one. And then they're calling up. And then I was on the Vindicator. And, they're saying the Halliburton loophole is a myth. The Halliburton loophole is a myth. And my response to that is, if it's a myth, why are there 4 bills in Congress trying to get passed to undo this mythological loophole? There's 4 bills in Congress. I have them here. And as many of you know, the Halliburton loophole exempted this fracking from the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, Superfund, National Environmental Policy Act, and the Toxic Release Inventory Act. Pretty much anything having to do with air and water, it's off the hook. In fact, they even redefined the definition of a pollutant that it doesn't include stuff that has to do with oil and gas production. So by definition, it's not a pollutant. And we'll probably come back to that. And then also, what about the drill cuttings, right? Well, we didn't have the federal government take care of that. Our state government did. Last year's budget, so last summer's budget, took these radioactive drill cuttings and they defined them as beneficial material, meaning they could put them in landfills, spread them on farmers' fields, and so beneficial use. But they said this beneficial use does not include technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material. So maybe we're safe, right? If they're drilling this stuff out of the ground, it's technologically enhanced and it's radioactive. So maybe we're safe because maybe it's not beneficial. But unfortunately, no, because they defined this TNORMS does not include drill cuttings. So they excluded it, so no. So this drill cuttings, the radioactive drill cuttings. So we got the air. We got the water. We got the drill cuttings. I also, Susie reminded me to say that the reason they showed the video on the impoundment ponds was that in 1983, they were banned in Ohio. That was when they started the injection well program. They banned the impoundment ponds. That was the injection wells was sort of the solution to these. But just now, January 1st, they're back on the table. They can start using these again. So in their wisdom, they've said these radioactive drill cuttings can be put in landfills, spread on farmers' fields, and now they're bringing the impoundment ponds back. It's just crazy. Okay, and then this one here. This is a couple of years, came out. It was new to me, though. But this is an article from a labor website. I have the reference here. It's called In These Times. And what it's about is that since the shale gas boom has come on, employment has increased 62% in the oil and gas industry, but also fatalities have increased 42%. Now, if you wonder, how are people getting killed? It's not the explosions like we had. Everybody knows about the one in Greene County, and I'll address that briefly in a second. That's the third on the list. It's not getting hit in the head by the traveling block or a drill pipe or something. That's second. It's actually vehicle fatalities, accidents. And the head here, and in this article, and I'll just read a little, the National Transportation Safety Board chairwoman, Deborah Hirschman, in 2011, wrote a letter to the Department of Transportation saying that the oil and gas industry, believe it or not, has been exempt from the federal highway safety rules. And she wrote a letter saying, end this exemption. And his response was, no, that's been in place for nearly 50 years, and we're just going to keep it. So there's one industry, the oil, the air, the water, the drill cuttings, the safety rules, they have a pass on all of that. And this is Ian McKee. This is a 27-year-old oil field worker that was killed by the explosion. And I'm sure most of you are aware of the ridicule that Chevron got from going around and delivering a coupon for a free pizza and a soda to people that lived in proximity for this. The state was quoted as saying, well, we're glad nobody lived within a half a mile, even though the rules say it's only 100 feet, right? 100 yards, 100 yards away. No, a feet. It's 100 feet in Ohio. Sorry, 100 feet in Ohio. But this was in Pennsylvania, though. And so, but again, it was a tragedy. And it took several days, like 4 days, to get the fire out, and then the gases were still leaking out of that. Now, many of you were in Niles back in January last month when the head of the ODNR came to give a little pep talk, Jim Zeringer. And guess what he said? He said, hydraulic fracturing has been done in Ohio since the 1950s, and there's never been a reported case of water contamination because of hydraulic fracturing. Where did we hear that before? And then just last week, a guy from the API, the American Petroleum Institute from Ohio, came around and made the rounds. And I think this was damage control because of that paper that got leaked, that sort of communications report, which I'll talk about. So he came around and even says visiting the media. And the same guy, Dan O'Brien, wrote this article as well. And again, commercial drilling has been happening in Ohio since 1860, and we've had hydraulic fracturing in the state since the 40s. This isn't new to Ohio. There's not a case of hydraulic fracturing process contaminating water. And again, I have a problem when you can't tell the difference between the industry lobbyist and the head of the regulatory agency. What's going on there? And I'll come back to that. And Tony Ingraffia talked about the Barnett Shale and saying how it started in the 90s and then it started to move forward. This is a little pie chart on the bottom showing the number of wells. And the red ones are this is in the Barnett Shale where this whole horizontal drilling, slick water, high pressure, high volume fracking started. And the red is the horizontal wells. And if you look, they didn't take off till 2004. And so it's been 10 years in the place where it started. So when they're saying that, they're just wordsmithing and basically trying to mislead people to think that that's what the case is. What we're dealing with now with shale gas has only been around for 10 years. It's an experiment in progress. In regard to that response, I used the Buffalo News website for this, but it was an API paper that came out in the beginning of January. Some states confirmed water pollution from gas drilling, and it listed Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Texas. So again, them saying that there wasn't any. But now they said Ohio had 37 complaints in 2010, 54 in 2011 with 2 confirmed ones. And it winds up being since 2011, there's been 6 sort of confirmed cases of groundwater contamination in Ohio. But the ODNR spokesman says that the 6 confirmed cases of contamination, none of them were related to fracking. But again, what's he calling fracking, right? Is he just calling that week when they're doing the process? I'm going to follow up and try to find out from this new spokesperson, Mark Bruce. There wasn't any mention of Wyoming in there. Pavilion, Wyoming has been documented first by the EPA, then by the U.S. Geological Survey. And John Denton, who was the farmer and the rancher in Wyoming that many of you have seen in the Gasland movies, he's going to be coming... Fenton, yeah. He's going to be coming to Coshocton in May. Him and Calvin Tillman are going to be coming to Ohio. So you may want to, I think it's May 17th. So we have some information about that. And many of you in this audience are aware of the problems that they've been having in Dimock. And what was interesting about Dimock was just last summer, the LA Times broke the story how that they had the data that Dimock had been contaminated. The regional EPA office had the data in 2012, and the federal EPA squashed it and said that there wasn't any evidence of contamination. And this wound up, and it came out on the LA Times website. If you search by the journalist's name, you can't find it. In fact, it was missing for a while, and I had a little email exchange, and it's back up there. But it's difficult, and they changed the title of it, so it's quite actually, I think they sort of call that web scrubbing or something. So, but it's there, but it's hard to find. But they documented that, and also they documented that, it was related to the drilling. Things got worse after the drilling that came out. And then also in the Dallas-Fort Worth, with the gentleman that was featured in Gasland and Gasland 2, his contamination. But this even goes back further. This is a paper that came out looking at results from the 80s. And what had happened is this came out in 1985 by the USGS, and then it was reported on by this paper called Cracks in the Facade. They drilled a well in West Virginia, and just a vertical well, and they fracked it. And what happened is the frack fluids got into the reservoir, like it was supposed to, but there had been some older wells from the 1940s into that same reservoir, and it came back up those older wells and wound up contaminating the groundwater. So when they're saying there's not a case of fracking contaminating groundwater, they're lying to you. It's just, and they keep repeating the lie more and more, so they'll think that people are going to believe it. There's also what I think these are both interesting. There's cases where there's been a blowout, where they're fracking in one well and the frack fluids blow out in another well. One was reported in the Calgary Herald, and this was from 2 years ago in Alberta, Canada, where a farmer's field, a kilometer away, the frack fluids came blowing out in an older well in the farmer's field. This article is scrubbed. You can't find it. It's off the Calgary Herald, but I did find a place where you can still find that article. And in that same place where I found it, they talk about Mark Mangan, who's been to one of our town hall meetings with his attorney, because his house has been contaminated with methane, and they couldn't even live there anymore at the time. And then this is now a year and a half, in October 2012, there was a 30-foot methane geyser coming out from a frack job, and it was in an older well that was drilled in 1932. They had problems with this well back when they drilled it. It was for sort of coal gas, and they wound up, they had blowouts back when they were drilling this well in 32, and then almost 80 years later, they wound up having a 30-foot geyser blowing out this well of the frack fluids that lasted for more of a week, and it had some surface contamination. And this is important, I think, with these older wells, because this is the first well they were drilling with the Consol Energy Cadle well. There's just a couple of shots. And the concern is it's that red diamond, which is in the safe drinking water source protection area for the Meander Reservoir, where all those people in Youngstown and Niles, myself, my family included, that's where our drinking water supply is, and they're fracking in there. And John Williams is here, and he wound up going to the EPA and saying, who's in charge of the surface water, do you know that they're permitted a well in the safe drinking water source protection area? Until John went and told the EPA didn't even know that ODNR had gone ahead and do that. And one of the responses is, well, there's almost 100 wells in that region already. What are you complaining about? And this is showing the reservoir with all of these older wells. And that's the big concern, because, these wells are old. They were into the Clinton Formation, which the Clinton was also they're sourced by the Utica shale, right? The Utica's beneath it. The gas has been basically leaking out of the Utica and going up into the sandstones, into the Clinton Formation, and they have all these, close to 100 wells in there that are all over 30 years old. And industry's own data shows that, and this is a chart here, it's the percent of wells drilled that have what's called sustained casing pressure. Basically, the cement job is either failed instantly or is failing due to decay or corrosion over the years. So it's the stuff between the steel pipe and the rock formation that's supposed to be like a seal to hold everything in. And if you can see all these lines on here, it's sort of age going from 0 to 30. But 6% of these wells, the cement jobs fail right away. But if they get up to 30 years old, half of them have failed. They're suffering with the sustained casing pressure. So we have close to 100 wells in that region, and now they're going to go ahead and frack. And at least half of them are potential conduits to contaminate our groundwater as well as the reservoir. And then also they discovered an orphan well. There's over 200,000 orphan wells. These are wells that nobody knows about until somebody finds them. Like they said, they've been drilling since 1860, right? They weren't keeping any records in Ohio back then. There's estimated over 200,000 of these wells that are in the state that people don't know about until they stumble on them. And this was one called the Bear Camp Orphan Well Plug. And I think I have another picture here, right? Here's what you see the thing on the lower left. And that's Meander Creek right there. And it was leaking oil when it was discovered, and they requested, it cost $30,000 of taxpayer money to plug and abandon this orphaned well. So who knows how many of these potential problems we have. Now the earthquakes. 5 minutes. Okay, I got to go quickly here. We wound up we had 12 sort of what are called regional earthquakes, right? Magnitudes 1.8 to up to the greatest was 3.9. And the study came out in the ODNR, they started in March of 2011. They shut the well down on December 24th, 2011. We had the biggest one on December 31st, 2011. And then a couple of weeks later, in February, we had the last one so far, and they tapered off the smaller ones. And so a preliminary report, they never released the final report, came out. They had injected over 20 million gallons, started in December 2010, and they showed close proximity to the place in the earth where the earthquakes were happening with the bottom of the well. Further, a paper came out by Dr. Kim from Columbia University, and this one here, this is a map view on the top, and there's numbers on there, and they're showing the order of the 12 big earthquakes, and on the bottom is slices, and they can actually see the earthquakes were migrating away